Alright, so for today's video, we're going to be adding into our knowledge of participles. So we already know two types of participles. Can anyone tell me what they are? Yes, the present active and the perfect passive. Now, what is the identifying mark of the present active? Good. It's either an NS in the nominative form or an NT as a part of the stem for all the other, the genitive, dative, ablative, and, accusative and ablative forms. So you'll see one of these two forms. And what declension does present active follow? What type of adjective group is it a part of? Yes, it is similar to the third declension adjectives. So it's going to, have that blank, or well, in this case, the NS form in the first, and then is, e, m, e, and then all the plurals, etc. Now, what is the identifying mark of, or how do we find a verb's perfect passive participle? Right, it is also the same as the fourth principal part. So if we go to verbs and we look at their four forms, the fourth one is going to be the perfect passive participle. And what adjective group do these fall under? Right, there are 2 on 2. So they have us, a, So the third group that we're going to add is very similar to the perfect passive. They are called perfect actives. You see, Latin verbs are divided up into a couple of different major groups. All right, so you have your regular verbs that typically have 4 principal parts, and they conjugate just normally ost, mostis, nt, bombas, bot, bombas, batis, bont, all down the line like that. Not much is different. And then you have the irregular ones like sum, esse, fui, or possum, posse, or eo, ire, to go. And those are all irregular, and they follow some of the patterns, but they're not quite there. Well, I hate to break it to you guys, but there's a third group of verbs, all right? And these are verbs, they have half of the forms that regular verbs have. And that's where our perfect actives come from. They come from this new group of verbs that can only ever be translated actively. All right? So that's why perfect actives exist, is because these verbs, for those of you interested, they're called deponent verbs. These deponent verbs have no passive form. All right? For everyone else who isn't really grammar, doesn't really love the grammar that much, you just have to know that there's a set of verb participles now that will only ever be translated actively. And so what does that mean? Well, let's take a look at some examples. If you go on to turn to page 33 of your textbook, the green textbook, there's a bunch of examples. So in part A, we have a couple of examples with perfect passive participles. So rex, a Romanis, honoratus, semper fidelis manebat. Honoratus is our perfect passive participle, comes from a regular verb, honoror, honorare, honoravi, honoratus. It's a first conjugation verb, and so it literally translates, the king, having been honored by the Romans. Here's our participle phrase. Having been honored by the Romans, was remaining faithful always, or was always remaining faithful. All right, the next one, we have puellae a patre vituperatae non responderunt. And so vituperatae is our participle, our perfect passive participle, and it's agreeing with the girls, puellae, that's why it has this ending. That's why it has this AE ending. Honoratus was agreeing with the king. So that's why it's US. This is agreeing with the girls, puelai. That's why it has the AE. But so the girls, having been blamed by their father, did not respond, did not reply. All right? So you notice, with the perfect passives, we always translate them having been, and then we fill in verbed. All right? Now, with the perfect actives, we don't need that been. All right? So it gives you a couple of more examples. So, Wilibia colinam ingressa, sorii filbilam ostendit. So, Wilibia, that's a person's name, having entered the kitchen, showed the brooch, showed the fibula to her sister. So here is our participle, ingressa. All right? It looks like a 2-1-2. It's the fourth principal part of the verb that it's forming. But we have no been in there. We can only translate it actively. Go ahead, try and translate that as a passive. Having been entered, that sounds really weird. And that doesn't happen, all right? So we now have this class of verbs, perfect actives, that can only have an active meaning. Now, you're probably going to be wondering, how do we tell the difference between perfect actives and perfect passives? Well, unfortunately, at this point in time, you just have to memorize them, all right? Our book has done a good job of giving you only the participle form for the perfect active participle. All right. So if you go on to page, if you turn now from page 33 to 34, where it's the vocabulary checklist for this stage, you'll see adeptus aum, having received. Go down the list. You'll see ingressus aum, having entered. Pracatus, pracata, pracatum, having prayed to. So you have all these having verbed, and those are your perfect active participles. All right. So if something has a perfect passive participle, it will never have a perfect active. Perfect active is its own separate category. It's separate from everything else, and it's one of those things right now that you just have to memorize. All right. Let's go through a few more examples. Senex deum precatus abit. So this is the next one in part B, back on page 33. The old man, having prayed to the goddess, went away. Now you wouldn't have said, having been prayed. That just doesn't sound right, and the Romans wouldn't think in those terms. All right? Here's a couple more examples. This is coming from part C. So Modestus tabernum ingressus Wilibia conspexit. So Modestus, having entered the shop, caught sight of Wilibia. Or Wilibia multa verba locuta tandem taquit. So locuta means to speak. So here we have Wilibia, having spoken many words, at last was quiet. All right. Another one, mercatores pecuniam adepti ad naves contenderunt. So the merchants, having obtained the money. Notice, it's not having been obtained, it's having obtained the money. Sought or hurried to the ships. All right? So those are your perfect active participles. So now we have three different groups of participles. We have the present active, which we know from the NS and the NT. We translated ing. We have the perfect passives, which are the fourth principal parts, and we translate them having been verbed. And now we have the perfect actives, which just translate as having verbed. All right? And if it's a perfect active, it can't be a perfect passive. And if it's a perfect passive, it can't be a perfect active. So feel free to ask any questions in the comment section below. If not, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.